Welkom terug. Ons gas saam met ons via Teams vanoggend is Michel Bradford en hy is die tegniese bestuurder vir varke en pluimvee by The Huis, Suid-Afrika. Michel, good morning and thank you for your time.
Good morning, Dopie, and thank you for having me.
So let's talk about what exactly it is that you guys do. You guys specialize in feed and curating that specifically for maximum efficiency.
Yeah, that's quite correct. We are a feed manufacturer based in Natal, and we have plants across the country. And we make feed for all species of animals, but specifically I look after the pigs and poultry portfolio. So I'm the nutritionist or the technical manager for pigs and poultry in South Africa.
So interesting statistic is that around 70% of poultry production costs go towards feed. Why is there such a dominant expense in South Africa?
Yeah, it's a question that we're often asked, and it's a challenge that a lot of customers have, is that the feed is their most expensive component. If you look at the birds that they are using to produce broilers and eggs, these have been bred to perform at a very high level. If you look at broilers, they grow in a very short period of time compared to how they used to. And the laying hens can produce a lot of eggs in their lifetime, a lot more than they used to as well. So this means that those birds have nutrient requirements to be able to perform at those levels. And these nutrients are supplied in the form of the feed that we supply. And this is made from maize and soya and other raw materials. And so nutritionally, these need to be very well balanced for optimal growth and the egg production that we're trying to achieve. They are high density diets that to be able to achieve that, so that we can get the nutrients into those diets that they need. They need to be highly digestible. They also need to be made from good quality raw materials. So that makes these feeds not cheap. That makes them reasonably expensive. But they are designed, what you pay for is what you get. And then what can happen as well is that the costs of the raw materials can fluctuate based on all sorts of factors. Weather patterns, we saw last year in December where the maize farmers were not able to get into their fields because of the rain. We had a huge spike in the maize price in December. Because there was a lot of nervousness that we wouldn't be able to get the plants in or the seed in, and that we would have a shortage of maize this year. Things like global demand as well, depending on what's happening in places like China or in the States, there might be more demand for raw materials to go there, because they might have shortages, and that also can push up prices. When you have international conflicts like the Ukraine war, that also has an effect on prices and things. So those are things that affect the price of the raw materials and the cost of the feeds. But also what can affect the farmer directly is feed efficiency of his own birds on the farm. And feed efficiency is how efficiently the animals will convert that feed that we supply into body weight gain or to produce eggs. So yeah, that's the main reason that it costs so much to that the feed has such a big impact on the costs of the producer.
So I know from a little bit of research that you guys put a lot of emphasis on following feed companies' instructions when it comes to the way you need to feed your animals. What are some of the biggest mistakes farmers make when it comes to not following those instructions?
I think farmers generally follow the directions or the ways that they should be feeding their animals. I think some of the challenges they can have will sometimes be with the housing that they have. In South Africa, we have a lot of very old farms that have been going for many years, and they were built probably 20 or 30 or even 40 years ago. And the modern birds have been developed to be able to produce at very high levels. And these birds now require far more sophisticated housing and environmental control than they did in the past. And I think that's the big challenge that a lot of farmers are facing, is that to rebuild those houses again is a real challenge, because they're not cheap. A broiler house can cost you 2 million rand to build, and you want to put up probably 8 of those. So to find the money to put up a whole brand new farm is not easy. So I think the challenges they have is more to do with how efficiently these birds grow, and what facilities they quite often have. So I think those are probably the main challenges that we see with our customers.
So one of the biggest questions overseas normally is the feed that goes towards the poultry. There's a lot of people who say we don't want hormones in our feed for the chickens, but there's a large ask or a large requirement that there's a lot of animals being produced as quickly as possible to make sure food security is there. In comparison to other parts of the world, is our feed a little bit more natural and more sustainable for the animals?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I'm glad you raised it, Dupi. There's always been this misconception that we put hormones into the feed, and I'm going to say quite categorically that that's not true at all. Hormones are proteins, and if you put them into the feed, they often will be digested and broken down, and also they would be way too expensive for us to include into feed to support animal production. So hormones are not something that are used in animal production in any parts of the world, and especially not in South Africa. In South Africa, we still are able to use antibiotic growth promoters, because there is no legislation around that at this point, and a lot of farmers still use those, especially in the broilers, and that supports the bird from keeping them healthy and keeping their gut healthy and keeping them very efficient. But our focus in the long term is to work with farmers to slowly transition from using these sorts of products to becoming eventually or having much less in the way of antibiotics in their feed, like we see in Europe. But there are a lot of challenges in South Africa that have to be overcome for farmers to be able to produce birds in that way. But I would say that our birds are very healthy and very clean, and that consumers can be very comfortable with the products that they are eating and getting from the supermarkets.
Well, that's fantastic news. Michel, we're going to be right back with you. Dit is Michel Bradford, tegniese bestuurder van varke en pluimvee by De Huis in Suid-Afrika. Kom ons kyk net gou 'n bietjie na jou grootplaas kalender eers. Welkom terug, ons gesels 'n bietjie vanoggend met Michel Bradford, en hy's die tegniese bestuurder vir varke en pluimvee by De Huis in Suid-Afrika. So just before the break we spoke about the modification of foods and the misperception that there might be hormones in our food, but you reassured us that that is not the case in South Africa, which is always good. Can you explain the main nutritional differences in feed for broiler and laying hens, maybe?
Okay, yeah. Broilers and layers have specific nutritional requirements because they're raised for different purposes. If you look at broilers, they are bred to grow very quickly, and to reach the market in a short period of time, in under 5 weeks, about 32 days. They require diets which are higher in protein and energy for rapid muscle growth. So we're looking at supplying the nutrients for that. And they also need to be supported on their overall health and development. For a layer, when it's being reared, it has a requirement for protein and energy. But they grow far slower, and it takes them till they're 18 weeks of age to be the same sort of weight as a broiler. But we also have to manage the development of the reproductive organs of that bird, because that's the important part that's going to be responsible for producing the eggs that will end up on consumers' tables. So they also need a balanced diet, again, needing protein and energy, but also vitamins and minerals to support overall health and egg production. But they also have a higher requirement for calcium, because they have to form eggshells around those eggs. So the inclusion of calcium is much higher than it is for a broiler. And then we also have to remember that because these layers are kept to be until they're much older, up to sort of 80 or 90 weeks of age, we have to manage those birds to get to those ages in good condition and to be healthy.
So in South Africa specifically, we have a lot of small-scale and substance farmers, and you guys recommend a 3-phase feeding plan, especially when it comes to broilers. How does this plan improve the results for these farmers?
Yeah, with your smaller-scale farmers, they often are producing for a different market to your commercial and big producers. So they are often producing for a live market or even a niche market. Their investments in their facilities are lower, and they don't have a lot of the technology that is used in modern broiler operations. They tend to feed manually, and that can be by hand, and they don't have sort of environmental control systems. A lot of these farmers then take feed in bags rather than in bulk, as we do with our bigger customers. So the 3-phase program is then much easier for them to manage for a start. And it is also, those feeds are designed to suit those sort of management and facilities that these farmers would have. So the program normally consists of a starter feed, a grower feed, and a finisher feed. And it's easy then to be managed by the farm.
Now, in your view, what's the biggest feeding-related challenge that South African poultry producers are facing right now?
I think probably the biggest feeding challenge is the cost of the feed, which we spoke about earlier. But I think it's also to do with performance of the animals and making sure that they get the efficiencies and the performance out of them that they are capable of doing. I think it's a balance quite often for farmers to look at the cost of the feed and to look at what they are trying to achieve as far as the performance of the animals.
Yeah.
And I think those farmers who are looking at profitability are the ones who are most successful. They don't then necessarily always go for the feed that is the cheapest, but the feed that is going to give them the performance that they expect from their birds, whether it is a broiler or a layer. And then they maximize their profitability rather than trying to save costs. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we see.
Well, Michel, thank you so much for your time this morning and educating us a little bit more about the necessity of good feed when it comes to our poultry. We appreciate it. It's Michel Bradford, tegniese bestuurder vir varke en pluimvee by die huis.